Who can tell me what a minority attack is? So we're going to keep this very interactive, like I mentioned. Put your answers right in the chat. What's the minority attack? And we'll kind of get a sense for how different people think of the minority attack and how we want to define it. And bonus points if you can mention what pawn structure, the name of the pawn structure that it tends to come out of. Okay, Matt's saying fewer pawns attacking more pawns. Michael is saying pawn push to create a weakness when you have fewer pawns on that side. Cody's saying fewer pawns versus more pawns. Multiple people are saying Carl's bad pawn structure. Yep. Less pawn storming, more pawns. Great. B5, B4. Fewer pawns on that side, but you attack with them. Yeah. Okay, so you guys got it. So what you want to do with the minority attack, and this can happen from either color. You want the side where you have less pawns to attack the opponent where they have more pawns. So you see here on the queen side, we have 2 versus 3. What black can try to do here is push these pawns up the board and trade off for the white pawns. Because in the end, once you're able to start getting those trades, that's when you can leave white with a pawn weakness. So picture a rook sitting on c8 right here. It hits c3, but it's defended by a pawn. If you were able to trade off this b2 pawn for this b7 pawn, then this is a backward pawn, not defended by any other pawns at that point, and it could easily be attacked by a rook on the file. So that's kind of the goal. And if you, let's say you trade the c pawn for the b pawn, well, now the pawn on d4 for white is an isolated pawn. It has no buddies to defend it. So what you're trying to do is use your 2 queenside pawns to create a weakness on the opponent's queenside. And like I said, this can happen for either color. So sometimes in the Queen's Gambit Declined, for example, white has the option to do the minority attack because the pawn structure is flipped. The other thing to think about with the minority attack is based on the pawn structure, which side should each player attack on? So let me know in the chat, where should white attack and where should black attack? And this, keep in mind that all these rules in chess are sort of an average. Like on average, this rule works well, but there are always exceptions too. Okay, Chess Simple is saying white king side, black queen side. Yep, Max is saying the same thing. So let's think about why that is. Why should white attack king side? So king side is over here. Why should white attack king side? And why should black attack queen side? Chi-Town Dude is correct. You look at the pawn chains. So look at this pawn chain for white and this pawn chain for black. The direction that the pawn chains point helps to dictate which side of the board you should attack on. Well, why is that? Let's go a step further. Taking a look at the black pawns, you can see the space behind the pawns helps to dictate the flow of play. So black space looks like this. White space looks like this. Right? And now you can pretty quickly see that, okay, working behind the pawns, black is going this direction, white's going this direction. And if we get these pawns rolling up the board for black, then there's even more space over here on the queen side behind those pawns. So typically you're going to see a minority attack from black in this position, and white is going to attack king side. Now, the reason I said that you need to be a little bit aware of all rules having exceptions is because in this position, there is another plan for black. F6, E5. And this is a plan that we do recommend in the ChessGoals Caro-Kann course, but there's no problem going for the minority attack. They're both perfectly viable plans, but sometimes it's nice to play this way when your opponent thinks, okay, they're just going to go for the minority attack. And if you catch your opponent off guard with this sort of plan, you build this really nice, big, solid pawn center with the black pieces. That's why we recommend this in the Caro-Kann course usually. But minority attack, Perfectly good option. Okay, so we're going to jump into the first game, but are there any questions about kind of in general what the minority attack is? Or is everything making sense? Yeah, you guys are nailing those questions in the chat. Old rule is the way the pawns are pointing, direction of the pawn chain. King side, queen side, you guys got it. All right. A-okay so far, makes sense. Good, good, good. Dave says got it. Perfect. Okay, first game we're going to look at. We have Andrew Tang with the white pieces from Minnesota against Magnus Carlsen with the black pieces. And this is a bullet chess game. So who says bullet chess games can't be instructive? This one is pretty instructive. We have super high level players playing bullet chess. We get d4, d5, bishop f4, c5, e3 by Tang. And Carlsen takes the pawn on d4, move number 3. In classical chess, you're not really going to see this capture so early on. But there's a reason Tang is doing this. Or, excuse me, Magnus is doing this. He wants to create a Carlsbad structure right out of the opening. And this is a bullet chess game. And one of the easiest plans in chess to play for is the minority attack. It's just so simple. You get your Carlsbad structure. You got the 2 queenside pawns. Push B, push A, push B, push A. Trade, trade, trade. Create a pawn weakness. Attack that pawn. You can just play on autopilot. So that's what Magnus is trying to do here. So now both sides get developed. I'm going to go through these couple moves a bit quickly to reach the interesting position, which is right here. Okay, so we see we have this exact pawn structure that we highlighted in the introduction. Carlsbad structure. Black is going to go for the minority attack. We already sort of talked about this. Let's put our answers in the chat. What should the plan be for each side? Maybe be a little bit more specific than just king side versus queen side, especially from the white point of view. Because even though we're looking at these minority attack games from the black perspective, it's very important to kind of have an awareness of what our opponent is trying to do as well, because there are times where we need prophylactic moves. We need to prevent what they're trying to do while we play for our own plan. Okay, Max is saying plant a knight on e5 for white and perhaps push f4, f5. Yep, that's a good plan. Chi-Town Dude is saying for black, we need to look at a6, b5. That's right. Chess Simple. I'm glad you mentioned that. This is something that James asked about too in our Discord server. What if white plays pawn to b4 against the minority attack and sticks a knight into the c5 square? So they get this pawn structure against our pawn structure with these pawns. They try to lock it up. Dave, great suggestion. h4. This is a really common idea to try to expose the black king. h4, h5. Use that pawn to attack. And Dennis is saying maybe we even insert rook b8 while pushing the b pawn. Good. Another thing that white looks to do, they will look to play a4. And the reason for that is because if a6, b5, and these pawns trade, white would love to leave us with just a pawn on b5, no a pawn, because then that's an isolated pawn, and they would still have this connected pawn chain. So that's a strategy for white. Look to play an early a4. All right, good. So let's go ahead. Rook e1 played. Dennis's move, rook b8, preparing b5. a4 by Tang, slowing down b5. a6. And now knight f3 was played in the game. I want to look at pawn to b4 by white. So going back to Chess Simple's idea, what if white tries to play b4 and lock up the queen side and prevent the minority attack? Now let's say we play pawn to b5 here. there is this pawn tension. I need to check something. Oh, I see. Okay. There's this pawn tension. A pawn and B pawn. So you see how these pawns attack each other? Here's a question for the chat. Does the pawn tension favor white or black here? What do you guys think? Push, so maybe equal? I'm seeing a couple answers for white. Dave says white. Just simple white. Black is stuck. You guys got it. And the way to think about who the pawn tension favors, I like to look at the options. This pawn has two options. He can either sit still or he can take. This pawn has three options. He can sit still, he can take, or he can push past. And then also there is this A file. So black really doesn't want to take here because it leaves black with this weak pawn on A6, and white can take at any time. So there's really almost one option for black and three options for white. That's why this pawn tension favors white. So Michael's wondering, could you say that black already accomplished creating the weakness on C3? In this case, Michael, I would say no, because here's the move that white's going to play. Knight to B3, excellent move. Now, we can't immediately take the A pawn because this A6 pawn is going to be extremely weak. After rook takes, rook and queen both attack our A pawn. So let's say we try queen B6. Now white could play pawn to A5. And at first glance, you might be thinking, okay, we just have this backward pawn on C3 for white. Isn't this much better for black? Just put the rooks on the C file, attack that guy. We have no big pawn weaknesses. Black has the weakness on C3. That might be true if there were no knights on the board. But what white's going to do, so queen C7 just poked at this knight. Queen E3 defends it. White's going to stick this knight on C5. And that knight is a huge problem for black. This is already a clear advantage from the white side, because that knight forever attacks the pawn on A6. And even if we reroute our knight to trade off for the white's knight, then white can capture back with either pawn, creating a protected passed pawn coming down the board, which is a nice long-term endgame advantage. So this position is a clear advantage for white, even though we did achieve something that we talked about, a backward pawn. So we need to think about, can this knight block things in the center? Going back to here after knight b3. So if you guys reach a scenario like this where you feel, okay, that minority attack that I started on the queen side, it's not going very well, and I'm about to reach that position we just looked at, there is another plan. We have to be quick. What you need to do here is you need to play dynamically with the black pieces. The best move in the position is rook e8. Now let's say white plays knight c5, the move they wanted. Here, to play very dynamic chess, you can take on a4, and after they take a6, rook a8, they take the a pawn. So we're down one pawn here, but you can smash through in the center with pawn to e5. And after d takes e, knight takes e5, even though we're down a pawn, this position is equal according to Stockfish. Because look at how we have the knight sort of tied down, queen's double attacking, but these pieces are all well placed in the center, and maybe we can still attack the c3 pawn. So this is sort of a higher level plan, but it's something that I want you guys to keep in mind, because if your minority attack is going south, you do not want this position. Avoid this position at all costs, because chances are you will never win with the black pieces. You are very likely to lose, and best case scenario is probably playing for the draw. Whereas this position, it's a wild one. Stockfish says equal, and you have the initiative. Downside is you're down one pawn in the endgame, and it's a pass pawn. All right. So another thing I should mention, when white first played b4 here, I would not recommend playing b5. You could switch gears and play a move like a5, And after this pawn pushes, get the knight out of the way. And now your plan could be play against the c pawn. And the best thing that white should do now is to push it very quickly so that this pawn doesn't become a weakness. So when you see this early b4, a4, a5 is a nice way to meet that pawn structure. All right, let's jump back to the game. Yeah, so Max is saying, is this the plan you go for? I would look to play a5 instead of b5. But if you're already stuck in that b5 position, then yes, take a4, play e5, and open things up. So in the game, knight f3 was played. Pawn to b5 by Magnus. Takes. And now this pawn is guarded by the rook, and it's ready to go to b4. Pawn to b4 by white is an okay move, but there's no knight ready to hop into this square. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. Knight e5 played, attacking this knight. And here, taking the knight is a perfectly fine plan. The pawn will take back, and this guy will have to retreat. Magnus plays queen c7. Queen g3, so here comes Tang looking for kingside pressure. b4 is a good move here, but Magnus played knight takes e5 first. And I think he should have actually played b4. I know I'm criticizing the best player in the world, but it's a bullet game and I have Stockfish helping. But playing b4 here makes the most sense because there's no immediate threat from white, and you want to play this move while you have the opportunity to do it. Sometimes you'll see a knight plant on d3, for example, and it makes it much harder to get the minority attack going. So he took, pawn takes, knight e4 hitting the queen, queen moves, pawn to b4. Pawn to b4 is a small mistake in this current position. Can you guys tell me why in the chat? What should white play here? And this is another thing that we need to consider with the minority attack. When we play b4, there is this option for white sometimes. And it kind of goes back to that balance of playing very strategic. I know how to do the minority attack. Push b5, push b4, versus playing dynamic. Because top-level players don't like getting stuck in strategically bad passive positions. They will always look to fight. That's right, Dave. Tang missed pawn to c4. It's a nice counter shot. And even though it looks like that pawn could be captured, it gives white the initiative, and Stockfish is saying it's a 1-point advantage for white. So hard move to see. It looks like you're just gambiting a pawn. And this is a bullet game. So Tang played knight e2. B takes c, b takes c. Magnus got what he wanted. There's only one super weak pawn on the board, and it's white's pawn sitting on c3. Now let's go through this just pretty quickly to see how Magnus finishes the game. He gets active with his rook, gets active with the queen, and Tang's going to look for kingside counterplay. So see him bring this rook over to the g file. He's ready to bring the queen down this way, either to h6 or to g5. Magnus respects this attack and brings his knight all the way back to help out. And then he finds this really nice move, rook to a4. So he has safety square for his king. There's no back rank mate. He's looking to trade off an attacker. If this rook moves off the 4th rank, this pawn drops. And he wants to make the game all about the pawn on c3. So queen g5 played, takes, queen b3 hitting this guy, takes the pawn, sidesteps the check, and mate. So even though this was a bullet game, I think it was really instructive just to see the flow of the minority attack from the strongest player in the world. And I think there were some nice kind of points here on what happens if white plays an early b4. How do we play against that? But really, this is what you want. You want a game where you can create the main weaknesses on the board on white's queen side. All right, let's jump into game number 2. This one is Caro-Kann. Black's rating is 2370. White's rating is 1890. Kind of a strange Caro-Kann. Came out of a 2 knights with an early a6. But we're going to get to a standard position in the minority attack. Carlsbad pawn structure, playing for the minority attack. Right here. So exact pawn structure we've looked at, with only one minor difference, the pawn on h3. And black plays pawn to b5. Now, I want to look at this b4 plan again, just because it's a really common idea for white to stop the minority attack. So pawn to b4 by white here is an inaccuracy. Black can play pawn to a5. And the reason this works is because the pawn on b5 is not pressured by white. So one of the ideas that white can use to slow down our minority attack is to either have their bishop or their queen on this diagonal pointing at our pawns. Because when the bishop or queen point at these pawns, it becomes hard to push them. You push the A pawn, you drop the B pawn. Push the B pawn sometimes, you drop the A pawn, if that one wasn't on B4. So here, everything is working out for black. Nothing is pressuring these light squares. So what we can play is pawn to A5, A3. Now, going back to that question, who does the pawn tension favor? Here it favors us. It favors black. Now we can play knight e7, queen d3, queen d7, and notice that there's no knight on c5, and this knight is not even close to getting there. So this is a very nice long-term play against the backward c pawn for us. And the eval here is around minus 0.3. Okay, so going back to the game, playing b4 by white takes it from about equal to a minus 0.3, and then black is playing for the advantage. Bishop g5 played, queen b6, queen e2, getting the queen on this diagonal, but our queen is really well placed. So keep that in mind too. b6 is a great square for the queen to help defend these queenside pawns as they push up the board. On to b4. Another thing to note, Dave mentioned this c4 plan for white in the last game. We have d4 double attacked. We only need to attack it once, because then when white plays c4, we simply win this pawn. So white's just a sitting duck here. He can't do anything. He can't push this pawn. He really doesn't want to take because d4 becomes super weak, so he just has to sit and wait. And he needs to look for counterplay on the king side. Now a question for the chat. What do you guys think the eval is? What's the stockfish evaluation in the current position? White to move. And so you can get it the closest. Sometimes when I ask this during a class, the eval bar is showing. But fortunately, I have it turned off. All right, chess simple, -1. Matt's saying minus 0.8. Adam minus 1.5. Michael minus 0.6. Minus 0.6. Minus 0.9. Minus 1.7. Okay, it's interesting. Everybody is favoring black more than stockfish. The eval is minus 0.3. And this is something that I think it's important to keep in mind with the minority attack too. Typically, the minority attack creates one weakness for the side that has the extra pawn on the queen side, right? So maybe you get a weakness on c3. But if you were to play engine versus engine, 3,000 level players, usually they can defend one weakness in an endgame with equal material. So typically you do need to press for more than that, but human versus human, I think your guys' evals are very good. Now maybe it's around -1 for black here. Stockfish versus stockfish, it's saying minus 0.3. So with perfect play, white's still holding this, but I agree with you guys, black is the one pushing for the win, and I think right around -1 feels more accurate for human play. Okay, queen g4 by white, trying to attack. B takes C, B takes C. There's our weakness. Let's work against that pawn. And we also have this weakness too. Knight e7 played, opening up the rook. Here comes white, h4. Queen b2, creating a double attack. Pawn on c3 was already threatened once. And now the only move for white to stay close to equal is pawn to h5. So again, we see this dynamic of one side's playing for a static advantage and one side needs to play for a dynamic advantage. White needs to play actively here and sacrifice a pawn to keep this position equal, according to the computer. h5 is needed. But that's such a hard move to find. You need to essentially say, okay, I'm going to lose this endgame unless I checkmate black or get a perpetual check. That's what it feels like when you play h5, but that's what is needed here. The move played in the game was queen e2. So white's holding everything. There's no rook takes c3 because black loses the queen, and the queen can't take either pawn. But the problem is now white is stuck playing this very passive endgame. Into 2300 against a 1900, black is going to start grinding. Knight c6 played. Bishop comes back. Knight out to a5. Rook hits an open file. And this is the same thing that Magnus did. So take note of this. Notice how every black piece is active. All four pieces are doing something on the queen side. Rook c6. Knight f3. And this is a cool move too. Every time your opponent makes a move, it sounds obvious, but you want to look at what their threats are, what their plans are. In this case, it makes a lot of sense to make a prophylactic move or two. Slow down white's play. Don't give him so much counterplay. And then continue with the queenside pressure. So I love this move. f6. White's going very aggressive. It makes sense. Now king f7. The king guards the weakest pawn for black, freeing up the rook on c6 so it doesn't have to guard this pawn. Rook c1. Bishop a3, poking the rook. The rook moves. And now rook takes c3 is the best move. I'm not sure why it wasn't played. Rook takes c3 hits this knight. That's the idea. Rook b2 played in the game. g5. Take. Rook takes c3. And black went on to win this one pretty easily. Up a pawn. Because there's still this weak pawn. This pawn can be attacked. And look at how black's pieces are super active. I'll just play quickly through these moves. This pawn still controls the knight. Black pushes the a pawn all the way up the board. White's rook is stuck. And then the rook comes over to help out, wins that pawn, and wins the game. Any questions so far? That's 2 games in. Any general questions on the minority attack? Next we have 2 2400s. Another Caro-Kann. Dennis says, nice game. Chess Simple says, very helpful. Good. Yeah, I went through, I think I've gone through more minority attack games in the last week, maybe than I ever have in my life. Just trying to find good examples and different tidbits for the different pawn structures that can come out of the minority attack. Great question. Adam says, how do you get a feel for keeping up the pressure versus defending? What I like to do, Adam, is I first look at my opponent's plan. And then I think, how strong is their plan? And how easy it is for me to slow down their plan. If I can spend one move to slow down 3 moves, for example, then that's worth it. And on the flip side, if their plan's not super strong and mine is on the other side of the board, I'm just going to plow ahead with my plan because I know they can't do anything about it. And it's going to take even more time for them to get their attack going. Great question, Chi-Town dude. So let's go to that position. Flip the board. This pawn structure is the Carlsbad pawn structure. It's when you have 5 pawns on one side and 2 pawns on the other for one color. And then the other side has these 3 pawns on one side and 4 pawns on the other side. So that's the Carlsbad pawn structure. The minority attack is one plan that comes out of that pawn structure. So the minority attack specifically is this plan of using the pawns to attack. And the minority part is you have less pawns attacking more pawns. So sometimes when you have more pawns, you try to use more pawns to attack less to create a passed pawn. But in this case, we're trying to create pawn weaknesses. We're trying to trade off a couple pawns and leave the opponent with one weakness. Okay, so here we had a weird opening in this one, but it got to this position. Standard minority attack. There is this bishop on g2. That's a little bit different. White plays rook d1. And now there was a mistake by black. So I have a question for you guys. Question in the chat. What is the best move for black here? The eval is 0.00. Yeah, Dave is saying great tip about white should look to get a diagonal piece on this diagonal. You want to pressure these pawns from the white side. Very interested to see what you guys think. The best move for black. What do we think? Mark is saying pawn to b4. Push that guy. Matt Markland is saying pawn to b4. What else do we think? "27 viewers, that's awesome. And 15 likes. So if you haven't, I would appreciate if you guys can hit the like button. And maybe share this with your chess friends if they want to learn about the minority attack. Okay, Dennis is saying watch out for c3, c4. Chi-Town Dude is saying we can bring the queen out to b6. Jacopo is saying, yep, watch out for c4. Okay, so let's look at pawn to b4. You guys are exactly right. The best move for white is pawn to c4. And in this case, white does have a small advantage. It's around 0.3. The reason white has the advantage here is because white has the bishop pair, and one of the bishops is on the long diagonal. So this kind of goes back to what we talked about, where there are rules in chess, but there's exceptions to each rule. And there are differences based on the nuances in the position. Because white has this bishop on g2 just waiting to come into the game, we need to be extra cautious about white playing c4. And if you look at the d pawn, we only have it attacked once. It's defended twice. So kind of going back to what we talked about, sometimes c4 can't be played because the d pawn drops. In this case, white is perfectly set up to play c4, and they actually want us to play b4. So we can't play that here. The best move for black is actually knight a5. And you're going to see this in some other minority attack positions too. The knight a5, knight c4 idea is also a very strong plan, because sometimes you provoke the b pawn to move, weakening the c pawn. And if the b pawn doesn't move, then our knight's sitting on a great outpost square, attacking that b pawn. So this would have been the best move for black, excuse me, knight a5. Knight d7 was played in the game. This was a mistake, because white plays knight to f4. And now, even though we're in this strategic pawn structure type battle, there are tactics on the board here. White is threatening knight takes d5. After e takes d, queen takes d5, hitting the knight and the rook behind it. So if white had a free move here, knight takes d5 is winning for white. Black plays knight b6 to defend. White takes. Black takes. Rook takes. Queen takes. Knight h5 played by white. And now a question for you guys. What should black play here? Black made a mistake in this position. Put your answers in the chat. What should black play? I like to talk about the weakest pawn on the board, and currently I think this is the weakest pawn because it's isolated, but it does still have this potential to push, try to trade for the c pawn. Mark is saying c4. I'm assuming you mean b4, Mark. So push that pawn up right away. Let's get a couple other guesses. What should black play here? This is a 2400. Made a mistake. Knight d7. Knight c4. So Mark, I think you had it on your first guess. Pawn to b4. In this case, black needs to play pawn to b4. And going back to Adam's question, how do you figure out, should I react to that knight or should I play queenside? We have to just look and see, are there any immediate threats? Are there any threats that we're so afraid of that we need to react? Because pawn to b4 is just our straightforward plan. And that's what black should have played in this position. Instead, he plays queen to d8. And I don't really understand the point of this move, because now white plays h4, and this attack continues. So what should black play in this position? The answer is pawn to b4. Instead, he goes knight c4. White plays bishop to f1. And now, due to tactics, pawn to b4 is not possible, because bishop takes knight, pawn takes back, and the knight on c6 drops. So due to tactics, black missed that chance to play b4. They go knight d6, knight f4 by white. Thanks, Mike, for watching. Again, black misses pawn to b4. Knight a5, knight to d3. And this is a nice idea when you're playing against the minority attack. You can also look to put a knight on d3. It does an awesome job not only slowing down black's b pawn, but looking at this potential outpost on c5. So this is going to be a game where black regrets not playing b4. Knight c4, queen e2, knight e4, bishop g2. The knight comes back, knight e5. Now there's nothing to defend the b pawn. And doesn't look like black's even going for it here. And now all of a sudden the h-pawn comes for white. So like we talked about, black needs to look to play queenside. White's looking to play kingside, but instead black is sort of just jockeying pieces around. Doesn't get the minority attack in with the b-pawn push. And white goes on to get a great position. Plants the knight on c5. Bishop f3. So this is helping to defend against this knight. So now white's making a prophylactic move. King f8. And here white has a nice, easy move. Bishop takes d6 and queen takes b5. So the b pawn actually lost for black because it was an isolated pawn and black was never able to, or never took the chance, I should say, to push that up to b4. So this is kind of a minority attack gone wrong from the black side. But the nice thing for you guys is black was just missing the easy move multiple times. Pawn to b4, pawn to b4. You just have to play it. You don't want to sit in this position with an isolated pawn for too long. That's the takeaway from this game. Matt, we're focusing on the black side only, not for any great reason, except that I think it just makes it a little easier to think about it always from the same side, to see the different structures from the same side. I think the reason initially that I wanted to look from the black side is because a couple ideas for this course, or this lesson, I mean, one of them was to look at Carol Kahn games, and another was to look at the minority attack. I thought, well, this comes out of the Caro-Kann quite often. We could use the Caro-Kann games to look at the minority attack. How would you defend against queen g4? Yeah, so like right here, let's say, queen g4. This is a good move by white. Probably what you have to do is play knight e8. And then if like bishop h6 is played, kick the queen out. So this is one where you definitely have to calculate. Are you ready and prepared to meet all of white's threats? Jacopo has a question. Is there an example where the knight is on c3 instead of the pawn for white? So usually if the knight's on c3, what you can do is put a rook on the c file hitting c2 and then push the pawns. You can kind of create the same type of play knowing that there's a soft pawn on c2. So the pawn's more solid on c3 as part of the pawn chain. On c2, it's not as good. And the knight on c3 is a pretty bad piece running into our pawn, and e4 is always going to be defended by our pawn. So that's a good question because it does feel different. All right, fourth game. We're speeding ahead to this position. This came out of a Caro-Kann. Question for you guys. What should black play here? What's the best move for black? Put your answers in the chat. White has the queen on d3. Looking at the diagonal. There is a bishop on g2 again in this game. I like this position a lot because it kind of combines everything we've talked about so far. Wow, so two people are saying we should go b4 in one go. That's just a joke. So b5, two people are saying b5. Grab that space, go for the minority attack. And I think you guys have the plan of playing b4. Makes a lot of sense. No need to apologize. Any other moves besides b5? There is one move here that's a little bit stronger than the others. Chess Simple's got it. Knight a5. So knight a5 is the strongest move. It was played in the game, and we'll look at that. But first, let's look at b5. So I'm going to dive in a little bit into Stockfish evals here. So right now, the eval is about 0.0. After b5, it goes to about 0.3 for white. So this is going to be a positional advantage for white. And it's because white has the chance to play either b4 or a4 or both here. Let's look at pawn to b4. Now, if black plays kind of the typical minority attack, knight a7 to defend this pawn and go for a5, notice how the queen on d3 is slowing us down, right? She's pressuring that b pawn. So we don't have a quick a5 here. After knight a7, knight c1 by white, and this knight is very quickly heading to c5. And this is the position we don't want. For example, a5, a3. Why did I play h6 here? Oh, just to prove a point. Okay, knight b3, knight c5. If white gets this exact position, we are in trouble as black. This is a 0.3 for white, but it's a 0.3 where we're stuck with the weakest pawn on the board, and white still has the kingside play, whereas our queenside got locked up. And we really never want to take this knight. So what we need to do back in this position is break in the center. It's like we talked about in that earlier game. When the queenside play, the minority attack is going bad, that's when you look to break in the center. Switch to dynamic chess, not your standard strategic push the pawn chess. Yes, we're still pushing a pawn, but we're trying to create some dynamic chances. If d takes e, knight takes e5, White is slightly better here still, but we're fighting. We're not just sitting and waiting for white to attack. Okay, so in the game line, b5, I would say that's not quite a mistake, maybe an inaccuracy, but it does give white the upper hand. So knight a5 is the best move. Bishop f4 played, queen c6, rook ac1, and now b5. So what's the difference? If white plays pawn to b4, we stick our knight on c4. All of a sudden, this queen has no scope, and we're controlling things. This knight can't get to b3 to get to c5, and now a5, rook a8 is actually going to favor us. We're going to be the side playing active on the queen side still. So just that little difference, getting our knight to a5 and into c4, goes from 0.3 for white to a minus 0.4 or minus 0.5. So a black advantage. So white realizes this and does not play b4. They play b3, trying to keep our knight out. But now look at this pawn. It doesn't have a pawn to defend it anymore. It's a weakness. Queen b6, bishop comes back, h6 by black, knight f4, knight b7, queen e2. Now this is where I start to have a problem with what black is doing here. He plays bishop to a3, and I don't think he has a great plan in this position. So this is the next question for the chat. What would you guys play here as black? Because I'm not a huge fan of bishop a3. He ended up having to retreat it right after. So marking the other position, as soon as white had the pawn on b4 and our knight was on c6, there was no way to get the knight to c4. Okay, a5, DE is saying, rook c7, according to Adam. Double the rooks. Yeah, one move I was looking at here was knight to d6, I thought was interesting. But the knight kind of came from d6. Just simple saying b4. Yeah, let's look at this. b4. If white plays c takes b4, this is going to be an advantage for white, and I'll show you why. Rook takes, we grab the pawn, take, and then the a pawn drops. So we don't quite have time to do that because of this pressure still. Right? The only way we're going to take back this pawn, our queen has to leave the defensive a6. So this queen is well placed for our b4. But here's the idea that I liked. Knight d6, knight d3, and now going to DE's idea, pawn to a5. And if knight to c5 played, we can go knight to f5. And we're threatening bishop takes c5, winning a pawn. Right? We have this attacked a million times. And if white plays b4, it doesn't work because this f5 knight pressures d4. Take, win a pawn. So in these strategic positions, you do have to look for tactics. I think this was the best plan for black. Keep this queenside play going. Use the knight to help pressure this pawn. Okay, bishop a3 played. Rook b1. Drops back. Knight d3. Knight d6. Knight c5. Knight f5. b4. So white has this sort of perfect structure. And in my notes, I put perfect in quotes. What is a good move for black here? What should black look to do? I can tell you white's plan. White's going to want to put a rook on a1, go a4, take our pawn, we take back. We have a weak isolated pawn, and white wants to try to control the file and long-term attack our pawn. So white's looking for this queenside play. What should we do here from the black side? Put your answers in the chat. A5 again. If A5, there's a tactic. B takes A5, and the rook and queen are both lined up with this pawn. So if we take here, oh, well, that one falls for a fork. Sorry, we can't take with queen. So yeah, this is just a nice reply using tactics. Knight B7 and also this pawn double attack. Okay, just simple saying bishop D6, rook E8. Oh, my arrows are bad. Rook E8, pawn E5 if possible. No one has mentioned the top move yet. There's a move here for black. It's counterintuitive because it's actually going backwards from where the piece used to be. It's moving back to where it was. Chess Blitz rating. Chess.com, I think I'm 2450. But I haven't played since, I don't know, September. I have not played in a long time. Okay, no one's mentioned the top move yet. Adam is saying knight E7. Oh, DE got it. Okay. Dave got it too now. Knight to D6. This is the best move. You want to plant your knight into C4. So let's say white goes for that plan we talked about. We're now ready to meet it. Our knight on C4 blocks out the queen. There's no good way for white to pressure this pawn. We are fighting for control of the A file. It's neutral right now. Neither side controls the A file. And the eval here is 0.00. Dead equal. So knight D6, great move. It was played in the game. White goes A4, knight C4, takes. And coming up here, white will make a mistake. Both sides fight for the file. Black keeps the knight here. Notice how black is looking to put the queen on A8 and take control of the file. These players are both rated 2000. Queen C2, queen A8, takes. This is still a 0.00, but I like what white did here. She doubled her rooks on the A file, put the queen on B8, and forced control of the file. She caught her opponent sleeping a little bit. 0.00 position, but the problem for white is now she's stuck playing defense. And on this move, white makes a mistake. She plays bishop takes C4. And the reason I wanted to show this game too, so we had this nice dynamic of the knights on C5 and C4, but we have this interesting question. And I want you guys to put your answers in the chat. This is the last question, last chess question of the class. Which pawn do you take with? D pawn or B pawn? One of them gives a half pawn advantage for black. The other gives a 1 point advantage for white. Don't say the wrong pawn. Okay, you guys are too good. Everyone's saying D takes. That's correct. If you take with the B pawn, the problem is this is a protected pass pawn, and when it decides not to be protected, it's getting super dangerous with the help of the queen and knight. We don't want to allow that. You got to take with D. And now black has the advantage. This pawn is not easy to attack. This pawn is easy to attack. That's the difference. White plays F3, queen A1 check, the king moves, and now this knight plants on D5. We've got a double attack on this weak pawn on C3, and this knight isn't doing anything. So that knight moves to defend the pawn. We kick it with F5. It moves again. And now here there is queen takes C3. Well, this move is also perfectly good. G4, knight takes C3. Knight e2. This is a checkmate in 11 moves with best play. Here's the mate threat. The only move to keep white in the game for longer than mate in 2 is to sack the queen. That's the checkmate in 11. So white resigns.